Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the second episode of the EUCOPE webinar series Life Science Lectures. The series will discuss in a multi-stakeholder format the impact of the EU pharmaceutical package on the EU competitiveness and innovation in pharmaceuticals. And we will also discuss issues around access for patients. So it's a real pleasure later on to introduce also two patient representatives in our panel. In the first episode, we talked about conditional incentives. And in the second episode, which is today's episode, we will discuss whether the definition of high unmet medical need and unmet medical need will steer innovation to the EU's and will be really able to close existing gaps in that respect. I do have distinguished panel with me today, and we will start today with MEP Tomislav Sokol from the EPP, who is also a shadow rapporteur on the pharma package regulation, who will share his introductory remarks. We will then move into a panel discussion, and it's a great pleasure to welcome Claudia Louati, Head of Policy at the European Patients Forum, EPF. Secondly, Diego Ardigò, Head of Research and Development of Global Rare Diseases in Chiesi, so to represent the pharmaceutical perspective. And last but not least, it's a great pleasure also to welcome Simone Busselli, Public Affairs Director at EURODIS, Rare Diseases Europe, to be also representing the patient perspective on this important topic. To make this webinar interactive, we will have a question and answer session at the end of our panel discussion. So feel free to share your questions in the dedicated chat and specify whom you're representing, and also to bring in your question. So we really want to make this interactive to make sure that every aspect of also the participants will be touched upon and be made part of the discussion. I should also mention that the webinar will be recorded and will be made available after the session on our website. And with that, I would just want to share two very short introductory remarks. We all have seen that the European Commission has released a far-reaching proposal on the so-called pharma package, which concerns a definition, actually two definitions, one for high unmet medical need and one for unmet medical need. And these definitions are extremely relevant to determine the duration of orphan exclusivity and also the duration of regulatory data protection. But also these words, which we have been using in the pharmaceutical industry, have far-reaching implications also for patients, but also for healthcare systems, for price negotiations later on, which we are as industry conducting at the national level. So it is a concept which is very much debated in Brussels and will be very much debated over the next couple of months and probably years. So the definition is going to be very crucial. And this is the reason why we have been choosing this topic as our second topic for the second episode. And I do see that MEP Tomislav Sokol has joined us in the meantime. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. And I would kick it off with your introductory remarks by asking you two questions. Welcome very much, MEP Sokol, first of all. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Can you hear us well?
Yes, I can hear. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. I have to apologize at the start that I won't be able to stay because we have a pretty hectic schedule in Brussels, mainly doing with health. But I would like to definitely try to introduce what I think are the most important points of this whole package of pharma legislation. So first, when you speak about the pharma package, we definitely have one problem, and that is the timeline. So the proposal came very, very late, and for that reason, it is very hard to imagine that we'll be able to finish with the whole work until before elections. So that's the first point. But definitely, I think it will be important that at least the Parliament defines its position and its mandate for the future negotiations with the Council. I think that is possible to do that, but we will have to really work hard. I'm personally, that we have a directive and a regulation. For the directive, the rapporteur is colleague Pernil Weiss from my political group. And for the regulation, we have the S&D rapporteur, and I'm the shadow rapporteur of the EPP. So I will definitely be involved on that, but mostly with the regulation. When we speak, so that's the general state of play that we have now. What about the content? I think we should definitely start with what should be the objectives, the aims, what we want to achieve from this pharma legislation. And I think personally, the crucial thing is first to stimulate research investments into research innovation in Europe. I think that's the key. We saw during the pandemic, but also in the crisis of supply chains and inflation, etc. We see that it's very important to actually have production capacities and to have investment and facilities within Europe. So definitely what we have to do on the European level is to see what we can do to become more attractive, what we can do to attract investments to come to Europe and instead of US, China, etc. So I think this should be the first main objective. And the second main objective should be ensuring access and definitely ensuring equal access to all EU citizens to medicines. That's important. So we cannot have first and second class citizens. We cannot have these big differences which exist in the European Union. And the pharma package should definitely aim to achieve this as much as possible. On the other hand, what I have to say, especially on this second part, is that pharma legislation is not a silver bullet. It's not something that can resolve everything. Because so far, that pharma legislation deals with the procedure and conditions for putting medicines on the European market. So, which means essentially evaluating safety and efficacy of these medicines. Health technology assessment in a broader sense, and especially pricing and reimbursement decisions are still made on the national level. And of course, and I believe that the crucial reasons why we have these differences in terms of access are there because of these different national regulations on the level of the member states. Of course, some of the reason is different financial capabilities of different member states, but also different rules, different procedures on making reimbursement decisions. Different levels of transparency of these pricing and reimbursement decisions. So a lot of problems there exist, which are because of the organization of national healthcare systems themselves. Unfortunately, we cannot change this with the pharma legislation. So we cannot resolve everything, and we cannot resolve the main problems relating to access, which are about the pricing and reimbursement mechanisms, etc., which are outside of our competence on the European level. There is the Transparency Directive, which regulates the pricing and reimbursement procedures, etc. But this directive is outdated. It's 34 years old. And whenever the Commission or the Parliament wanted to amend this, the Council blocked that. So it seems that the member states do not want to have more, or at least some member states do not want to have more unified, more harmonized procedures on making pricing and reimbursement decisions, or even the criteria. And because of this, the problem of having equality of access will not be resolved, unfortunately, in the near future. So what we can do with pharma legislation? So when we speak about, I would say we have the substantive part and the procedural part. On the substantive part, obviously the biggest discussions will be about incentives. So incentives, the time of regulatory protection and things like that. You know that the proposal envisages shorter baseline time for the of regulatory protection, but then if certain conditions are fulfilled, we can go even higher than that. You can go up to 12 years or something like that. I personally think that the idea of this kind of modulation is good in principle, meaning that it is that we really should not provide the same incentives for really new and innovative medicines, which really address conditions like rare disease where we have nothing at all. So those which really provide the added value, and the others. So I think the idea of modulation, the concept of modulation, that to really stimulate more what we need more. So in those areas for those diseases where we need more investments, is a good approach. However, I'm not sure whether the reduction of the baseline is a good thing, because I think that especially when companies make business plans, they will put in their business plans only what they think is certain, and this baseline time is certain. Everything else, which depends on external factors, is not something that you will calculate necessarily in your business plan, because it's uncertain. So I think that definitely we need also more certainty in terms of incentives. We need more clarity, and what is crucial is that the incentives that you get do not depend on external factors. For instance, if you want to invest, etc., that you do not, and if you have a condition that you need to put a product in all member states, that you are not then suffering damage because some member state did not do its part in terms of making pricing and reimbursement decisions, etc. I think the proposal is better in that sense than what was leaked before several months, but I think in terms of having more predictability and having more certainty on that, but I also think some things can be improved. So definitely I think the idea of modulation good. Reduction of baseline, I don't think it's the ideal approach, and I think we need more clarity, more certainty, and more predictability in the legislation, that you do not depend on external factors that are outside of your control. So that's the first point. On the unmet medical needs, of course, that will also be a big discussion. So how to define this? So we are introducing a big concept in the legislation, and it is important that we get this definition right. The definition is clear, it is precise, and it is not open to many different interpretations, so that you do not have a situation like we had with GDPR, etc. So it's so important. So having clear definition is important, and what is important is that we define the unmet medical needs in a way that we really, again, streamline the investments into what is really needed, into those areas, like I already mentioned, rare diseases, where we definitely need more investments, where we do not have anything, or we have very, very, very little in terms of medicines. So that this definition is really defined in a way that most incentives go in those areas where they are needed the most. So I think maybe so that the definition can be improved, can be maybe narrowed down or made more precise, but definitely that's definitely something that we'll be working on in the Parliament. On the procedural part, I think that the proposal goes in the good direction in terms of shortening the times, but I think we can be even more ambitious. I personally think that if we can, if there were some things, administrative things, bureaucratic things that we were able to left out when we were making, or when EMA was making the decisions on vaccines, on approval of vaccines, there is no need why these same things should not be removed in general. Because if it's said, and it was said that the simplifying of the procedure for vaccines did not jeopardize safety of vaccines in the end, then if it didn't jeopardize safety, why shouldn't we use the same approach for other medicines as well? So I think definitely there is still room to simplify procedure, also to provide more precise and more tailor-made special procedures for those medicines which should be the priority. So we should also see how to work on that. So how we define what priority is, so where we have a different and faster procedure. But in general, I think even though the procedure goes in a good direction, that still this procedure can be made faster and more simple. Also, I think that personally, my position is that once EMA has conducted its own evaluation, there is no need for the Commission to be making the final decision. I feel, because that's essentially rubber stamping, but we often lose time on the Commission making the final decision, and want to put medicines on the market as soon as possible. Of course, I know that it's not realistic to leave out the Commission's final decision completely, but I think that after EMA has conducted its evaluation, the decisions by the Commission should be made within 2 or 3 or 4 days after, not 30 or 40 or 45 days, etc. So I think on that we can also save time, and we can also do a lot that can be made better. It is true in general that Europe is, some say, pretty generous in terms of incentives. But when we speak about this, we have to take into account that maybe we are in some areas more generous in terms of incentives than the US. But in general, in US, it's much simpler to put medicines on the market because they don't have 27 different national systems, etc. So since we cannot remove this 27 different systems, so we have to. So in that area, we cannot improve a lot compared to the US. Then we have to look at what are the areas where we can be even better than the US, and where we can create a competitive advantage, because we have global competition. We have a situation where everybody fights for investments, especially high value, high added value investments like medicines and research and development of medicines. And if we do not get this right, if we do not do whatever we can to attract these investments to Europe, we'll have big problems in the future. So I think that this should definitely be the main thing that should be the guiding principle. So to try to work with the industry together and create an ecosystem which is much simpler, much faster, which provides strong incentives, and which is predictable if we want to attract investments into Europe. So I think this was more or less what I wanted to say. If you have maybe some questions, please feel free. I have some minutes still left. So if you have anything that you want to suggest or ask, please do.
Thank you very much, MEP Sokol. It's really, I mean, you've been addressing so many important things. First of all, let me also repeat from what we have been discussing in a multi-stakeholder discussion in the OD expert group, that we also think that modulation is needed, that we need to make sure that innovation is steered in certain directions. So modulation is certainly an important factor when we are redefining our exclusivities for orphan drugs. I think you made a very important point, and I would like to emphasize that when it comes to the Transparency Directive, we have existing legislation, and it is really important that when it comes to access, that we also somewhat observing what we're having in terms of legislation. We not always have to bring in new legislation. We also have to make sure that what we are having in legislation, and there are very clear timelines when at the national level decisions about pricing and reimbursement have to be taken, that we are observing that these timelines are really upheld from the patient perspective. I think it is really important that we are not putting products on lists in certain countries, but also that we are granting reimbursement for those medicines. I think that's very important. And
I mean, the directive has deadlines, I think.
Deadlines, so we need to
deadlines, 60, 90 days, etc. Yeah, but I think it's the Commission as the guardian of the treaties that should make sure and control whether member states are adhering to the directive or not.
Of course. And I think that's something which we should bring into the mix of the discussion in Brussels. Of course, we don't have to always change legislation. We should also observe if legislation is really followed at the national level from the perspective of getting better access to patients. And I think there is something we can do in that respect. The Commission has been kicking off discussions about this. I would have a question to you on that concept of unmet medical need, high unmet medical need. And I very much agree with you that it's very positive that for orphan drugs, we only talk about high unmet medical need, which already means there is unmet medical need. It's very relevant. But how do you see that definition? The definition, if you look at it from the perspective of industry, there are some people which fear that it's a very strict definition. I agree with you that we need to have predictability and not too many ifs. So reduction of mortality and morbidity is not always easy to bring to the table at an early stage of a life cycle of a medicine when it's authorized by the European Medicines Agency. So is that definition fit for purpose, or is it too strict in some instances, because it might also be difficult to negotiate good prices if you don't have a branding of an unmet medical need or a high unmet medical need from the EMA perspective? So how do you see that? Is that fostering innovation to bring, is that helping to bring innovations to European markets, or can that even be hindering by having having stricter definitions?
Yeah, I think again, the idea is not bad, again, because we really want the idea is again to stimulate or to streamline the investments into the area where they are really needed. So I think the idea is good, but I think there are some things that can be improved in the definitions itself. Some things which are not easy which are not really which is not sometimes easy to define, or some concepts which can also depend on different factors, etc. So definitely I think there is room for improvement, but I think it's still too early to be more specific about what exact the new wording should be. So there will be a lot of negotiations on that, but I think definitely it can be improved. We should definitely make sure that again that we use this to direct investments where they are needed, but not to stifle, not to create unnecessary obstacles. So I think yes, there is room for improvement, but definitely it's still too early to be more precise. And I'm generally pretty open about my positions on this, but sometimes it's better also to see first in what way the negotiations are going, and then to put all the cards there. But definitely what is important is that we would like to get the input from the industry and the other stakeholders as well, definitely. And this will make it much also, and also so that we get the input on what are the ways where and the areas where this can be improved, and then we can work with that. So the timelines now are probably that the first draft report will be presented sometimes in September, probably mid-September, something like that. So we still have some time, but definitely what I always say is that I'm open to suggestions and concrete proposals from the stakeholders to see what we can improve. But what is also important is that I always say, but it's important that these proposals are precise. So in form already of concrete amendments, so that we can really see within the text already how this reflects. So definitely I think there is room for improvement. I think there are, as you mentioned, there are some things which may produce obstacles which we do not need, and restrictions, but I'm definitely open for proposals and suggestions on how this can be improved and how the wording can be made better. It will not go away, I can tell you that. So the political atmosphere, etc., and everything is such that this definitely will be part of the legislation. What we have to make sure is that we make it as clear and as good in terms of the wording as possible, so that we achieve those objectives that we want.
Excellent. Thank you very much for those remarks. I mean, just a little comment from my end. It is really important that we stay open for innovation, because especially in rare diseases, much of the value we only see when the product is in the market. So when we're making that judgment call too early and not really opening up for real evidence, and how is a product really performing when we see it used in wider patient populations, because clinical trials very often are very limited. There are no direct comparisons. So it needs to be an open,
especially when you speak about rare disease.
Especially when we speak about rare diseases. So an open-mindedness also for the future after the product has been launched, I think, is important, as a little side remark from my end.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, that's why it's that we have another file that we are working on, that I'm the rapporteur on. That's the health data space, which I think is, especially when we speak about real-world evidence, which is crucial for rare diseases, and the rare disease community is the one who is definitely, I think, most supportive and most enthusiastic about the health data space. So it's also important that we get this right, and if we have this, then we'll be able to gather much more data from all member states than we do now. So that's why it's also important that this legislation is also adopted, and that the secondary and that it's made in a way that we get enough of data which is necessary for this so-called secondary use. And I won't go into too much detail on that. You know, probably that we have discussions about opt-out, opt-in. My position on that is clear. So an opt-out, I think, is a good compromise between the necessity to protect the patients and their patients' rights on one side, but also to have enough data on the other. If you go further than that, if you go for an opt-in or even consent-based system, you'll just not have enough data, and the whole EHDS will become useless. So this is why it's important also that we get the EHDS right, and that we can have much more data for secondary use, especially specifically for the purpose that you mentioned, to see actually how medicines are performing in practice. And I think in general, healthcare systems, I think the main trend in the future will be about performance assessment in general. So not just of medicines, but also of medical devices, medical technologies in general, hospitals, healthcare systems, etc. And I think this is definitely the future, that we measure much better what we achieve with the investments that we are making. And I think we have a lot of room for improvement, and definitely this will be the trend in the future. And this is why it's important that we get this legislation right now.
Thank you very much, MEP Sokol. It's a great pleasure to have you with us, and we're looking forward to the discussions in the context of the general pharmaceutical legislation. Thanks very much for your introductory remarks, and also for taking the one or the other question and staying with us. Thank you very much, and we will be in contact in the future as well. Okay. Thank you very much, MEP Sokol. We would now move on to our panel discussion. It's a great pleasure also to welcome Simone Busselli, who joined us in the meantime. Hello, Simone. Great to have you with us. And I would directly move into our little panel discussion here, given the interest of time. And I would have one introductory question. I think I've introduced all the panelists already. And I would have one introductory question to the panelists, which is, the Commission's pharma package introduces concepts of unmet medical need and high unmet medical need. And this is at the center of the new legislations. The concepts, as we just heard from MEP Sokol, will play a role not only in the modulation of incentives, but also will provide for additional regulatory support with the objective to drive innovation in underserved areas. Do you think that this is the right approach to fill in existing gaps and improve lives of patients across the EU? So when we're talking about these concepts of high unmet medical need and unmet medical needs, do you think that is the right concept for modulation? And I think we all agree that a certain type of modulation is needed, but have we been choosing the right wording or the right concepts to do so? So I would like to start start with Claudia, ladies first. It's a great pleasure, Claudia, to have you with us. If you could jump in on that question, if the definition is right and the concept is right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alexander, and thank you very much for having me today. No, I think it's a very important discussion, and it was good to hear also where MEP Sokol stands on this. I think one concept, that was missing a little bit is patients' involvement really in the definition of unmet medical needs. At the end of the day, patients are the end users of medicines, and I think they have a very different perspective than what we can think, from the industry, from healthcare professionals on what actual unmet medical needs is. So we do have some concerns with the definition as it currently stands in the legislation, in the sense that we see it as far too restrictive. It's unmet medical need, is not always a yes, no question. It has to take into account all chronic diseases, including those for which there is already a treatment available. You have to consider also the adequateness of the treatment, potentially its availability, the appropriateness, whether some patients would respond to it or not, and that also creates some unmet medical needs. Also, there are some important criteria in terms of quality of life, life expectancy that has to be taken into account in this unmet medical need. So as long, for certain diseases, you can live with the disease, but as long as there is no cure, there is an unmet medical need. And I think we can see that across different disease areas. I think, it is an important concept at the end of the day, because we also do want to avoid the orphanization, where any medicine can be labeled an unmet medical need just because, just to have access to additional support or to higher prices. So there needs to be a definition, but really what's important is that it is defined with patient at the core and with the patient perspective at heart.
Thank you very much, Claudia, for this. I don't think there is any doubt that the patients will play, or should play, actually. And I think that is likely to happen a critical role in making the definition and also applying the definition later on to individual cases. That is so critical. But also you made a very important point. I think that this is not an easy application or an easy definition to be put forward, because it's very often it's so much individualized, especially in areas like cancer and rare cancers and so on, whether a patient is responding to the first therapy in the market or not, and is there an unmet medical need for certain type of subpopulations. And so this is not an easy to make to give answer when it comes to individual products and individual patients if there is an unmet medical need. Thanks for highlighting this. Simone, I want to bring you in with your perspective from Eurotis, from the rare disease perspective. Thanks for being with us. So how do you see that concept of high unmet medical need and unmet medical need from the patient rare disease perspective?
Thank you, Alexander, and thank you, Claudia, for introducing the concept so well. Well, you very well know that it's tricky. Effectively, we welcome very much, and we have publicly stated that the modulation approach, that's on the rewards and incentives, trying to drive more investments towards those underserved area. However, whilst at the same time maintaining a good and competitive level of protection, particularly on the market exclusivity in the current legislation. So the fact that 9 years remain for all rare disease products that meet the criteria of prevalence, significant benefits is still quite important. However, when coming to the definition of high unmet medical needs, we have got no clarity on what is meant by exceptional therapeutic advancement in the definition of high unmet medical needs. And to some extent, we question whether a difference of 1 year of market exclusivity, we will effectively drive investments in this area. The spirit in which this, or the intention with which this regulation has been written is good, but the actual wording, as it also is seen in the actual involvement of patients in consultation to define inter alia unmet medical needs, is not specific enough, neither is strong enough. Therefore, even considering that the introduction of extended regulatory support, i.e. the article that codifies PRIME in the regulation, automatically provide support and to those high unmet medical need products, it's not rewarding many different avenues for development of therapies, but potentially pioneers or even just transformative or even curative therapies. So we need to work together to find the right way. And we already, I think, from the work done by the OD expert group, we have already a basis to start a discussion, but an appropriate discussion on how to drive this forward, maintaining an accent on the infrastructure that we already have available, in discussing what type of investment we really need, and particularly maintaining a high level of inclusions of patients, but also clinicians, sponsors, and other stakeholders have a say in how a high unmet medical need should be defined.
Thank you very much, Simone. I mean, you made a very important point to say, like, is plus 1 year enough to steer innovation? And I think it's these type of questions which we should put forward into the discussions in Brussels, because we've seen, for example, that plus 1 year of regulatory data protection has not been moving the needle when it comes to regulatory data protection to bring new indications for those 8+2 years. So the +1 has not been achieving a lot over the last 20 years. And I think we need to draw conclusions from other areas. What has really steered innovation there? You also alluded to the point that this is a thing where we really need to make sure that we're defining the terms appropriately. And there are so many words in the definition which need a definition in itself.
If I may follow up before I leave the floor to the very capable Diego, because I'm sure with the timeline that Mr. Sokol has outlined, I don't think we will have a lot of time to have this proper discussion, at least with the Parliament. And we need to be really mindful of that we really provide from all our side with our expertise and evidence of finding really the right sweet spot where the patient needs are addressed, at the same time maintaining the competitiveness of the sector and the affordability and sustainability of the health system. So we need to be really careful with this, in particular when it comes to those high unmet medical needs, where are they coming from? They're not just the larger population. There are in particular the very rare diseases, the less than 1 in 10,000, that already are very difficult to be economically viable. And therefore, how do we square the circle here? There is more needed for investment, infrastructure, public and private, and inclusion of patients to really define what is meaningful to them.
Thanks, Simone. Thanks a lot. Diego, over to you. What is the view of Chiesi, a mid-sized innovative company focusing on rare diseases, on this concept of high unmet medical need? How do you see that? Is that helping us with bringing innovation to Europe, or could that even be an obstacle in terms of not having that wording attached to your product that could also potentially steer innovation away from Europe? But I don't know. How do you see that?
No, I honestly see it as very problematic from many point of view. I mean, even epistemologically, methodologically, the definition mixes the need with the therapeutic advantage, which are two different concepts. So this is already the starting point. And we can deep dive into both of them, because I think that there are many issues around both of them. But I think the key concept is that getting that designation, that definition, brings a pharmaceutical product back to basically square one, back to more or less where it is today, maybe with some slight more advantage. So it means that clearly whatever has not functioned up to now will not function even with an unmet medical need or high unmet medical need definition, which is exactly what Simone was saying. There is more than 90% of the rare diseases that do not have any treatment under development with the current incentives. So making incentives that at the maximum they will replicate what is there today will not solve a problem that has not been solved already today. This is to me, is the main problem. In addition to that, we have to say that this underserved disease, they are underserved by development, mostly because they are so rare that they are basically unknown. So it is true that in these diseases, there is not enough patient to enable a sustainable return of investment. This is what everybody says. It is true, but the reality is that this is also diseases in which patients are not identified and diagnosed, in which medical knowledge is basically lacking. There is no basic research. There is no clinical research. So you completely miss the entire basis for defining your molecular target, developing the drug, and demonstrating efficacy and safety. And you can even imagine that demonstrating exceptional therapeutic advantage in this case. So in IRDIR, we have conducted a database search, and we have discovered that almost 3,000 rare diseases have less than 100 papers each in the whole medical literature. So if you want a comparison with that, consider that what we can call the more attention rare diseases like cystic fibrosis and Duchenne, they do have 2,000, 3,000 per year number of papers. And the true common diseases like diabetes, COPD, they go up to 50,000, 60,000 per year. So 100 papers in the whole history of a disease against 50,000, 60,000 per year. This is the starting point. So until we don't have a system of incentives that really support the generation of knowledge in these diseases, that we're not going to get out from the problem. And then if you go into the specific elements of the unmet medical need, of course, I mean, what Claudia said is clear. Unmet need also is present where diseases have treatment. All lysosomal storage disorders with CNS manifestation, they're still an unmet medical need, even if they have chemicals or enzyme replacement therapy available. In some cases, and this is the point of the definition of unmet medical need, who has the need? The patient. And sometimes for the patient, the difference is related to things that have a significant burden on their life. So things like the way the drug is administered, the number of administration, the side effect of the drug, they can make a huge difference that will not be considered at all by this type of definition. So the first drug coming to the market might not be the best one for the patient, but the second one will potentially have less space to come because of the definition. And then additionally, well, I'll leave the word to the other question, but additionally, as Simone said, demonstrating exceptional therapeutic advantage in diseases where you probably have 50 patients into your development plan, into your trials, and doing that at the time of marketing authorization is statistically impossible.
Yeah, thanks very much for highlighting that. I mean, thanks for highlighting the aspects of what do we do with the second product? Aren't we putting the hurdle too high there when it comes to the second product? Because we've seen that there is very often an unmet medical need or a high unmet medical need, even though we have one therapy also. We are all in for modulation, but we have also seen a lot of what we call step innovation, that the second product has been showing over time, but maybe not at the time of launch, that it is superior to the first product, especially in cancer and many other areas. And especially in rare diseases, you're highlighting that the small patient population can be an obstacle in meeting the high criteria, which are reduction of mortality or reduction of morbidity under the current definition, which is a very high bar at the time of launch. So we need to make sure that we got it right around the definition. Thanks for highlighting those points, Diego. Turning again to you, Simone, I mean, it is all about the 95% of rare diseases where we don't have a treatment option. And this is where we want to steer innovation. And this is where we are all up for modulation here, really. So Eurotis is advocating at the EU level and beyond to propose solutions to address the existing 95% gap of rare diseases with no treatment option. Does a proposed definition of high unmet medical needs, is that a step in the right direction? And what role should patient organizations be given in defining what a high unmet medical need is in that concept?
Right. I think there is a lot to do, and I would like to split your question in two parts. It is true that the 95% is what attracts and what probably keeps us at night the most, because this is a very large number of diseases that represent a relatively small number of people. And Diego elaborated way better than I did what the scientific challenges are, but think also about the challenges on the person, on the family, and on the surrounding community around that one person that has a very rare disease. And we are talking about diseases that sometimes already now, and we can think about examples that we have now that targets 10, 20, maybe 50 patients if there are in Europe. There are solutions, even transformative already now, that we can that are not reaching the patient in a timely fashion. And here, the problems that we need to address again are on the investment level, but investment not in just in terms of financial investment. There is a number of initiative that's from the IHI, from the European Joint Programming on Rare Diseases on the future rare disease partnership, not to mention the individual and private investment in R&D, plus all of the investments in infrastructure, such as the European Reference Network, but not only that, the C4C network, the EPTRI, the ECRIN, etc. We have invested a lot in this. What we're not seeing is a true ecosystem for that specific part of the population coming together. And that's what we are trying to achieve, particularly when it comes to an homogeneous approach to rare diseases. In fact, we always call for a European action plan to federate all of these actions and really make meaningful contribution on a goal-based and patient-driven initiative. How it is this piece of legislation that needs to be seen as part of this overall ecosystem going to drive is going to help in some ways if, one, the patient is included structurally in the consultation that the agency will have to undertake to define what the scientific criteria for clinical trials are, what the guidelines for unmet medical needs, high or low, are. And at the moment, unfortunately, notwithstanding the spirit and the intentions of the legislator here, we don't see it in the text as strong as we would like to be. Because in the, what for us very important, the Article 162, that identifies the ways that the agency will consult, we see a mandatory consultation of HTA and competent authorities in defining unmet medical needs guidelines, for example, which is fine, and an optional request for a consultation on patient, sponsor, clinician, and academia. And the only way that we can satisfy and get more therapies approved is through very early dialogue with definition of what are the meaningful outcomes from the patient, be them stabilization, be them in a specific population, what is the remaining mortality and morbidity, addressing also questions that I think is Irina Klimpo just put there. For example, is, you know, in orphan medicine product, you have the significant benefit, so you already have a comparator, but what do we compare it with, and what is the remaining unmet needs if a product is authorized but not available at national level? It still is the same. So it's quite important that we have this multi-stakeholder process very early, continuous, iterative, up to marketing authorization, in order to also plan for an accurate post-authorization evidence generation planning, which in rare diseases are so very important. I hope I was clear on that.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Simona. I mean, early engagement is critical. A multi-stakeholder view is critical. Patient engagement is critical in those discussions, but let's have those discussions early on. I think that is very important. And we have vehicles like MOCA, which we could use to do that. Before I'm bringing in back Claudia into the discussion, quick question to you, Diego. Again, from that company perspective, mid-sized innovative company perspective like Chiesi. So how do you see that concept? Will that concept spur innovation, especially in the rare disease space? I mean, you partly have answered that, but maybe getting back to you on what that concept could mean from the company perspective. I think it is, as we heard before, it's a concept which we have used before in making decisions about individual patients. When it comes to reimbursement off-label use, for example, in Germany, unmet medical need plays a critical role there. But we haven't used it for product labels. And I think that the world will look at that decision in a way which is made at a very early point in time of a life cycle of a medicine. I don't think anyone in the US would not follow that decision, which is made by the European Medicines Agency at an early point in time, and also in Japan. So the world will look at that decision about unmet medical need, high unmet medical need when it comes to new innovative products. So what's your view on the implications for companies?
Yeah, I think you touch upon the one of the two vital points. The first vital point is that we see reduction of incentives of any kind for diseases that maybe they do have already treatment, but they might not be fully covered in terms of the needs of the patient. And where it's getting more difficult to develop, less protected, and as you said, without a label that becomes at a certain point the new high standard that maybe reimbursement agency are looking at in terms of price, in terms of access to the drug. This is the point number one. And the point number two is that, of course, this does not increase or incentivize more the drugs that are currently underserved. So at the end, the point is that if you're sure to get that label, you'll probably pursue that, because we'll have a value. Also, I'm thinking also of biotechs, etc., that will have a value to have that definition. But if you think that this might not be the case, then the risk is that even innovative companies will potentially steer away from EU. I mean, the problem here is that we are already losing ground versus US. That's clear. 20 years ago, 40% of the research and development costs in the world were in US, 40% in Europe. same situation. Currently is less than 30 in Europe and more than 50 in US. There's already a big gap. This gap will increase. There is a potential that this gap increases in these conditions, and Europe becomes sort of a secondary market, an upside of a US development. So now the problem here is that if a company develops with the mindset of getting approval in US first, well, not only the product will arrive potentially later in Europe, but the way, the weight in which US requirement will be over European requirement in development, the focus, the attention where the product is developed will be completely different. So this is, well, in terms of pure industrial elements, where you lose capital invested in Europe, you lose focus on European centers, you lose the possibility of that early dialogue with European stakeholder, including DMA. So this is the risk I see, and the smaller the company, the higher will be that risk.
Thank you very much, Diego. I would like to bring in back the patient perspective here with Claudia. See, the European Patients Forum has been calling for many years to address underserved disease areas where patients have no or limited treatment options. Do you think that the proposed definition of unmet medical need is enough to cover these needs, and what other elements should be taken into consideration when making these decisions?
Thank you, Alexander. I think some of the points have already been covered, and I agree obviously with some of the points that Simone has brought up as well. But I think it's important to remember that this definition of unmet medical need has to have the patient perspective at the center. I mean, we've been advocating, for equitable access to medicines. Actually, this is one of the key messages, that the organization has been advocating for, and for strong patient involvement across the life cycle of medicine. So really from the very beginning to define the research needs, to the regulatory process, and then afterwards to the pharmacovigilance process. And what is regrettable in this definition of unmet medical need is that the patient perspective is completely absent. It's really it's a black and white definition in terms of, does your disease fill those categories, does it not? And I think this is quite damaging. So yeah, I mean, we've mentioned some of the criteria that are important for patients. At EPF, we're engaged in an exercise to try to define the patient perspective on unmet medical needs with our member to provide some concrete wording. But I mean, I want to emphasize as well that it's true that with the current timeline, it's very difficult to have an in-depth discussion as to what this definition will be about, because obviously the Parliament has its timelines that are extremely short, and the co-decision process does not exactly allow this multi-stakeholder discussion. So I think that's something to consider, as MEP Sokol was saying that this definition is here to stay. Well, then it has to we have to get it right, and we can only get it right if patients are really fully involved in the discussion, and is the co-decision and having it in the legislation so black and white, something that is very that is the right approach. I think on our side we would support a process led by the agency in terms of developing some guidance and making sure that this stakeholder consultation actually takes place.
Thank you very much, Claudia. I couldn't agree more, that especially given the fact that, as MEP Sokol mentioned it, the definition is there to stay. We need to have a robust definition, which takes into perspective, first and foremost, the patient perspective, but the various perspective on things, healthcare systems, which would want to have a say on that, HTA institutions, and last but not least, I think also we should give a voice to industry to speak about that, because also there is a lot of knowledge in some companies about some rare diseases, which we should listen to. Thanks for that point. I would want to, given the interest of time, open up very quickly for questions. We have 6 minutes left, but we have one question in the chat. What would be the impact of the joint assessment EMA UNETA collaboration here? I think that is a question which we will address in the third episode. I don't want to go into all the details about this, but certainly I would want to highlight that there needs to be various perspectives on that important questions of unmet medical need, high unmet medical need. Also, the regulators should be relevant there. And I mentioned before that health technology assessment bodies and institutions would want to have a say about this important question as well. They are looking into the value of medicines in all the details. So, but I think that's a question which we can address in further detail in the next episode. If there is any other further question, yes.
If I may just, Alexander, yes, no, I think it's an important question, you know, on the HTA, in the sense that it seems that this definition of unmet medical need will drive also some of the pricing and negotiation processes afterwards, and the HTA process further along. So again, you know, that shows the importance of getting it right. We do support, you know, some more coordination between the regulatory approval and the HTA, and perhaps, you know, having more coordinated data requirements. But again, you know, it has to be done in a way that that respects the patient's perspective and in a multi-stakeholder approach.
Right. I again very much agree with what you're saying, Claudia. There are effects on the pricing and reimbursement decision-making processes in having an unmet medical need or not having an unmet medical need. I think we highlighted that also very clearly. Let me come to the closing of this session by asking all of you to maybe summarize in 2 sentences your thoughts about this complex but also very important discussions. So, and also maybe you can give us a little bit of an outlook. What is your key message you'd like to leave to our listeners when it comes to addressing high unmet medical needs? So if you could summarize that. I know it's a difficult one because in 2 sentences, it's not easy to do, but if we could at least try to summarize your key message into 2 sentences for our listeners, it would be much appreciated. May I start with you, Simone?
Well, it depends. If you're asking to me in Italian, please be aware that they are about 50% longer than any sentence in English. So you'll be lucky if I do it in English. In any case, the key messages for us is inclusion, true inclusion of the ecosystem in the definition of both unmet medical needs, but also high unmet medical needs, and certainly much greater precision in what we want to define and support in the regulation, and that the 2 are linked together. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Simone, for being brief and clear on this one. Diego, summary.
Let me take a large stance. The first sentence will be that downsizing incentivism approach where they had succeeded in the past, and conversely perpetuating them more or less at the same level where they failed in the past. It's, to me, a potentially negative pursuit. I mean, not necessarily useful, and in some cases even damaging, because we'll curb the maturation of certain markets and certain diseases, and decrease the possibility of increasing the therapeutic armamentarium in some diseases, and will leave the forgotten ones still where they are. Second sentence is, to solve the issue of these underserved diseases is a problem around the entire society, and unfortunately we cannot solve it until it will be concerted at political level across Europe and member states, because you need a coordinated agenda of support to research, support to innovation, use of data, as it was mentioned before, diagnosis, care, everything should be pumped up in a coordinated way. Otherwise, we don't solve the basic issue, which is that these diseases are currently undevelopable from all perspective, and these patients are out there and they don't even know to have that disease.
Thank you very much, Diego. Thanks so much. Last but not least, Claudia, your summary, your takeaway message.
Yeah, summary, from us, I think, we're trying to define unmet medical need, but at the end of the day, I think we should try to define unmet patient need, because this is really what matters. And that's really the key, that I try to highlight the importance of the patient perspective also in defining innovation, and what innovation means, in the sense that what we believe is innovation is the degree to which the medicine makes a tangible benefit to patients.
I think that's a very important point, and let me summarize the discussion very quickly in a minute here. And I think I wanted to pick up on that point. I mean, what we're actually doing when we're defining high unmet medical need and unmet medical need, we're defining innovation, and that is very critical, and that is not an easy exercise to do. As we have heard from all the three panelists here, and also from MEP Sokol, I think we've briefly touched on a couple of solutions here. I think I heard from Simone that an early engagement is key. I heard from Claudia that, of course, and also from Simone, that the patient involvement in that important decision is of critical importance in both the definition, but also the individual decisions to be made in the future. We've heard also from Diego that this has significant implications on companies, especially mid-sized companies. It is a decision which will be looked at from also various angles, from the regulatory angle, but also from a global perspective, from Japan, Australia, and last but not least, the US. Bringing a product through pricing and reimbursement system, not having a high unmet medical need is most likely not an easy thing to do. If I may add that as my little remark to the discussion. We've heard as well that it might be not always so easy for the second product to make it to the market to establish superiority over the first one. So do we want to how do we factor that in? Because sometimes the second product is a better one, and just the first one being the first one shouldn't get the benefit of not showing superiority. We've seen that phenomenon in HTA processes. We've heard as well that small trials in small trials, it's not always easy to show that superiority. And I think we have addressed the issue from various angles, but I would want to really conclude with the perspective here that we should continue to discuss in a multi-stakeholder setting, as we've been doing that in the OD expert group. We have been open for modulation, but we need to make sure that we have predictable, clear definitions, and that we're not putting too many ifs into those decision-making processes. Thank you very much. I would like to also thank the colleagues in EUCOPE, Stefano Romanelli, to organize this second webinar. I'd like to thank you, Simone Busselli, for being with us, Claudia, Louati. It's a great pleasure to have you with us to bring in the patient perspective as well. And last but not least, Diego Ardigò from Chiesi, our member. Great to have you with us. Thanks to all of you, and see you hopefully in the third episode of the webcast series. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.